What's up guys, it's Tommy here and welcome to a huge massive video because a Labour politician is proposing an amendment to the Football Governance Bill which would prevent state ownership in the Premier League. So the Man City and Newcastle owners would be forced to sell the club like Roman Abramovich was forced to sell Chelsea when the war in Ukraine broke out. So this is, I think, massive news and it could have ripple effects and massive repercussions throughout English football. So we will talk about all the details in this video. The Times newspaper is reporting, the chief sports reporter Martin Ziegler has this article that Man City and Newcastle would be forced to change ownership to obtain a license to play in the Premier League if this proposed amendment goes through. What do you think about state ownership? That's today's question to you guys. Let me know in the comments below. Are you for state ownership? Are you against state ownership? Do you think it's good for the game of English football? Do you think it's good for the Premier League that Man City are owned by a country, Newcastle are owned by a country, and they are run like that? Let me know. I'm vehemently against state ownership and I don't want state ownership at Liverpool Football Club, even if that would make Liverpool the richest club in the world, because I want just Liverpool to be run like a club which represent the values and the history and the traditions of a Liverpool Football Club and the values and the traditions of the fans of Liverpool Football Club. So this proposal to ban state-controlled clubs from English football has been submitted in an amendment to the Football Governance Bill that will introduce an independent regulator for football. So basically, in the current form, Man City and Newcastle would be banned from the Premier League if this proposal goes through. The move, which would have to be agreed by Parliament in the UK, would mean that Manchester City and Newcastle United would be forced to change their ownership or not play in the Premier League. Basically, they would be forced to change their ownership in order to be granted a license by this independent football regulator. Lord Basham of Brighton, a Labour peer, has put forward the amendment to the legislation going through the House of Lords, which would prevent professional English clubs being owned or controlled by sovereign wealth funds or government ministers from any country. And I fully support this bill because state ownership should have never been allowed in English football. It completely destroyed the competition because of Premier League, the Man City basically ruling the last 7 years of the Premier League. They won 6 Premier League titles in 7 years, and if it wasn't for Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool, it would have been a 7 out of 7 without any proper title races out of like 5 of those 7 seasons. Newcastle are owned by the Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, while Manchester City's owner, Sheikh Mansour, is the vice president of the United Arab Emirates, so neither of those clubs can argue that they are not owned by whole states, whole countries. For the amendment to become law, it would also have to receive backing from the members of Parliament in the House of Commons, which in practice will only happen if the government agrees with it, but the Labour government has a majority, so they could push this amendment to the bill through. Insiders insist the chance of the amendment being agreed is small, but some Premier League clubs have previously urged the government to introduce such a ban. And this amendment states the legislation should read: no state-controlled club may be granted an operating license, and any affected club must satisfy the independent football regulator that they have divested in themselves of their state control before applying for an operating license. A state-controlled club is one which is wholly or majority owned by individuals, entities, or entities controlled by individuals who are deemed by the independent football regulator or the Secretary of the State to be under the influence of any state actor, including but not limited to members of any government or their immediate family, a head of state or their immediate family, diplomats, lobbyists, and other state representatives or their immediate family family and sovereign wealth funds. So this fully applies to Manchester City and Newcastle right now. The bill was debated in the House of Lords on Wednesday, but peers have yet to discuss this amendment. The West Ham vice chairman told the House of Lords on Wednesday that the government had ignored warnings from UEFA and handed even more power to the regulator over parachute payments to clubs relegated from the Premier League. Despite those warnings from UEFA, the government have made the backstop even wider and broader in scope to now include parachute payments, which are fundamental to competitive balance. She said they have removed the incentives for a football-led deal, which goes specifically against the advice of UEFA. So it appears that the government have ignored that letter and its warnings. UEFA spells out that the ultimate sanction would be excluding the federation from UEFA and teams from the competition. Brady said she supported another amendment which says nothing in the operation of the regulator should compromise the ability of football clubs, competition organizers or national teams to comply with their obligations to or participate in competitions of international governing bodies including UEFA and FIFA. And Brady said she was concerned that the regulator could damage the Premier League. This is a risky business, she said. It is a risk trying to get promoted, it is a risk trying not to get relegated, it is a risk trying to get into the Champions League. All football owners know these risks and each one has a different way of managing, calculating and understanding them. Some take on debt, some put in equity, some sell assets. They're footballers. If the risk does not pay off, but they go again. The problem with the idea of sustainability, which is undefined in this bill, being the purpose of the regulator, is that it can get in the way of ambition and aspiration, of calculated risk-taking, and all the things that make the Premier League such an exciting and competitive league. So let me know if you agree with this or not. Should parachute payments exist or not? I think it distorts the competition in the Championship because the clubs who got relegated from the Premier League have a huge advantage over clubs who have been playing in the Championship for many years. Of course, there are examples of Ipswich Town, for example, coming through the leagues and getting promoted to the Premier League straight away after getting promoted from League One, but they are the exception and not the rule. And a lot of football fans are skeptical about the original bill, being amended and this going through because, it doesn't look likely that politicians would ban Manchester City and Newcastle from playing in the Premier League, except if they change ownership. But I think politicians absolutely need to get involved with the Premier League in terms of state ownership. It should be banned because it's not good for the competition, and it's not allowed in any other industry that a whole state can own a company because it completely distorts the competition, the market, it destroys fair competition, and why should it be allowed in the Premier League if it's not allowed in any other industry in the world? And of course, don't be naive. Some fans will say the only way that Newcastle and Manchester City were able to be bought by their current owners is because they proved that they are not state-owned, which is a load of nonsense because, the PIF, when it suited them, they proved that they are not Saudi, they are not the state of Saudi Arabia when it came to buying Newcastle. But when they had to prove that they are indeed the state of Saudi Arabia, when they bought Live Golf, or they founded Live Golf, then they proved that they are the state of Saudi Arabia. So which one is it? It's absolutely ridiculous that the Premier League is letting this happen. And the problem is the Premier League system is not designed to deal with owners that are nation states, who can produce official government documents that can say whatever they want it to say. They can just forge any document because they are basically the government. They can just print anything on a government document because they are indeed the government. And you will still see frequently Man City fans and Newcastle fans deny that they are state-owned. Apparently a state investment fund owning you doesn't qualify as being state-owned in their eyes. Let me know where do you stand on that debate in the comments below. These hyper-rich people have their claws so deep into the government that they won't let go. And even if it would somehow work, they would find an easy workaround. You either ban any kind of ownership, or you accept the states and the war criminals owning your football clubs. And in Germany it's different because 50 plus 1% of clubs are owned by the fans. But it has been the default in Germany rather than clubs going from private ownership to member ownership. Only real example of is Hoffenheim, where there was a German billionaire spending loads of money on the club. They got promoted to the Bundesliga and then he handed it over to the fans like a gift. Because once you opened the door for private ownership, it's virtually impossible to switch back to member ownership, like the fans owning the football club. English fans would very likely be better off in a member-controlled model like Germany has, but getting there seems impossible due to the money involved in the Premier League. I mean, take a smaller club like Bournemouth, for example. They are worth around 200, 300, 400 million pounds at least in the Premier League, maybe even more. And they have maybe 50, 60,000 fans maximum, maybe 100,000 if we are generous now counting overseas fans. Like every single fan would have to pay thousands of pounds to get a membership, like a stake of the ownership of the football club. And that's not realistic because some fans are kids or like students and they don't have that kind of money. In theory, it's possible that the UK government could nationalize Premier League clubs because they nationalized banks, they have nationalized parts of the railways. Scotland bought back all of their railway companies recently, but the Premier League clubs, they are worth like billions of pounds. And would the owners of the Premier League clubs let the UK government take their club away from them? Well, if they are fairly compensated, maybe. But football is different in that you can't really nationalize it. For one thing, it would run against FIFA regulations on state interference, and I have a hard time imagining how the government owning and running a quarter of Premier League clubs is actually going to be a workable solution. Football might well be a common good, but it has an inherently competitive aspect to it as well. Nationalizing a few football clubs would run against that competitive spirit, and spending a few billions of tax money on buying out billionaire owners of football clubs just so they can be given back to the fans. It doesn't strike as the most sensible use of taxpayer money either, given the state of the United Kingdom, where there is a living wage crisis and the UK are in recession. So this is not the greatest time to do that, maybe. We have to also mention that, even though Red Bull, the company, poked through a hole in the German 50+1 model, they bought a smaller club, they spent a lot of money, they renamed it Red Bull or RB Leipzig, not officially Red Bull Leipzig, but we all know what the RB represents, and they managed to spend their way to get back into the Bundesliga, and they actually won some big trophies, won the German Cup twice, and they are challenging for the Bundesliga title regularly. But thankfully the UK has prevented the big companies from actually changing the names and the kits of football clubs, because they tried to do it. Previously, some owners tried to change the name or the color of some football clubs, but I think the UK government should have prevented state ownership in the Premier League a long time ago. So actually I support this amendment to the bill that they could ban state-owned football clubs from playing in the Premier League, so they should change ownership. Let me know where do you stand on this debate in the comments below. It's a very interesting topic that I thought is worth an own video dedicated to it, so I hope that you guys got a lot of information out of this. Thanks for watching, have a nice day, see you later guys, goodbye.